What happens when one of the most controversial members of the British royal family comes face to face with television's most ruthless interrogator? You won't believe what unfolds when Prince Harry sits down with Piers Morgan, thinking he can control the narrative, only to discover that Piers has done his homework and isn't playing games. This explosive confrontation that aired last night has everyone talking, and by the end of this story, you'll understand exactly why Harry stormed out in the most dramatic fashion possible. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when Harry's carefully crafted public image meets Piers Morgan's relentless questioning. The studio atmosphere was electric as Prince Harry walked onto the set of Piers Morgan Uncensored. Fresh from his latest media appearances promoting his memoir and various projects, Harry appeared confident, almost cocky, as he settled into the guest chair across from Piers. The Duke of Sussex had clearly come prepared with his usual talking points about mental health, his charitable work, and his new life in California. What he hadn't prepared for was Piers Morgan at his most unforgiving. "Harry, great to have you back." Piers began with that trademark smile that anyone familiar with his work knows precedes absolute carnage. "Now, I have to say, watching your recent interviews, there's something that's been bothering me, and I think it's bothering a lot of people." Harry's posture shifted slightly, but he maintained his media-trained composure. "Well, Piers, I'm always happy to address any concerns. That's why I'm here, to have honest conversations." "Honest conversations," Piers repeated, leaning forward. "That's interesting, because your definition of honesty seems to be quite flexible, doesn't it? I mean, you've made a career out of criticizing the media, yet here you are, constantly in the media. You've attacked the institution of the monarchy, while simultaneously trading off your royal titles for profit. So, help me understand. What exactly is your version of honesty?" The first crack appeared in Harry's facade. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. "I think there's a difference between using your platform responsibly and being exploited by an institution that doesn't care about your well-being." "Exploited?" Piers' eyebrows shot up. "Is that what you call a life of unimaginable privilege? Private education, royal protection, palaces, private jets, and a life that 99% of the world could never dream of? That's exploitation in your mind?" Harry's media training was beginning to fray at the edges. "You're oversimplifying a very complex situation, Piers. The institution comes with responsibilities and expectations that you abandoned when it became inconvenient." Piers cut him off sharply. "Look, Harry, I've been doing this for a long time, and I can smell bullshit from a mile away. You want to talk about responsibility? Let's talk about your responsibility to the people who looked up to you, who supported you, who believed in what you represented." The studio lights seemed to grow hotter as Harry shifted in his seat. "I never abandoned my responsibilities. I simply chose to fulfill them in a different way, without the constraints of service," Piers interrupted again, his voice taking on that dangerous edge that veteran viewers recognize as the moment before he goes for the kill. "You see, that's what really gets to me. You talk about service, but when the going got tough, when you actually had to serve something bigger than yourself, you ran. You packed up, moved to California, and started cashing in on your grievances." Harry's composure was visibly cracking now. His voice carried a sharp edge as he responded, "That's completely unfair, Piers. You have no idea what it was like to be in that situation. To have your mental health deteriorating while being forced to smile and wave." "Mental health?" Piers nodded slowly. "Yes. Let's talk about mental health. It's become quite the convenient excuse for you, hasn't it? Any criticism, any accountability, and suddenly it's about mental health. Don't get me wrong, mental health is incredibly important. But using it as a shield every time someone calls out your behavior? That's not advocacy, Harry, that's manipulation." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Harry's face flushed red, and for a moment, the carefully constructed public persona slipped entirely. "How dare you suggest that I would manipulate mental health issues? You have absolutely no right to." "I have every right," Piers fired back, his voice rising to match Harry's energy. "Because I'm not some sycophantic interviewer who's going to nod along while you rewrite history. You want to talk about rights? What about your grandmother's right to spend her final years without having to deal with your public tantrums? What about your father's right to prepare for his role as king without his son airing family business for Netflix money? The mention of his family clearly struck a nerve. Harry's hands gripped the arms of his chair, and his voice took on a trembling quality that spoke to barely contained rage. You don't know what you're talking about. My grandmother understood my position. She supported you? Piers laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that why you weren't invited to Balmoral when she was dying? Is that why you found out about her death through the BBC like everyone else? Face it, Harry, your family had enough of your games long before the rest of us did. But what Piers said next would push this confrontation past the point of no return. You know what really pisses me off about you, Harry? Piers leaned back in his chair, his voice dropping to that cold, calculated tone that signals he's about to deliver a knockout blow. You had everything. Everything. And you threw it all away because you couldn't handle being second fiddle to your brother. This whole victim narrative you've constructed, it's just jealousy dressed up as social justice. Harry's face went white, then immediately flushed deep red. That is absolutely not. Oh, but it is, Piers continued relentlessly. William got the girl, William got the crown, William got the respect, and you couldn't fucking stand it. So you found yourself an American actress who fed into your victim complex. And together, you've turned destroying your family into a business model. The studio fell deadly silent, except for the low hum of the cameras. Harry was on his feet before anyone realized what was happening, his chair rolling backward from the force of his movement. Don't you dare bring my wife into this, you piece of shit. There we go, Piers exclaimed, spreading his arms wide with genuine delight. There's the real Harry, not the carefully coached, media-trained puppet, but the spoiled brat who can't handle criticism. Tell me, how does it feel to know that your wife has made you into exactly what she wanted? A bitter, resentful man who's cut off from everything that once made him decent. Harry was shaking now, his fists clenched at his sides. Meghan has been nothing but supportive. She saw through the institution's bullshit from day one, and she had the courage to stand up to it. Something you clearly don't understand because you've spent your entire career kissing the establishment's ass. Kissing the establishment's ass? Piers stood up now, too, matching Harry's energy. I've made my career holding people accountable, including your precious institution. But there's a difference between legitimate criticism and what you've done. You've weaponized your trauma, monetized your family's private moments, and convinced yourself you're some kind of freedom fighter. It's pathetic. The confrontation had moved beyond the comfortable boundaries of a television interview. This was personal, raw, and getting uglier by the second. Harry took a step closer to Piers's desk, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You want to talk about pathetic? What's pathetic is a washed-up journalist who builds his career on tearing down people who are actually trying to make a difference in the world. Making a difference? Piers laughed harshly. You're living in a $40 million mansion in Montecito while lecturing people about inequality. You're taking private jets to climate change conferences. You're charging 6 figures for speaking fees while talking about service. The only difference you're making is to your bank account. Harry's self-control was completely gone now. At least I'm not a fucking tabloid hack who destroyed people's lives for stories. How many people did you hurt when you were editing newspapers? How many families did you tear apart for headlines? And there it is. Piers slammed his hand on the desk. When cornered, attack the messenger. This isn't about my past, Harry. This is about your hypocrisy. This is about the fact that you've become everything you claim to hate. Someone who exploits personal pain for profit. Someone who destroys relationships for attention. Someone who hides behind noble causes while pursuing selfish goals. The accusations were flying like bullets now, each one designed to inflict maximum damage. Harry's breathing was labored, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and what looked suspiciously like shame. You have no idea what it's like to have your every move scrutinized, your mental health questioned, your motives constantly doubted. Actually, I do, Piers shot back. The difference is, I didn't run away crying and blame everyone else for my problems. I didn't abandon my responsibilities and then spend years justifying it with therapy speak and victim narratives. Harry's voice cracked with emotion. My mother was killed by people like you, photographers chasing her, tabloid journalists making up stories, The media treating her like a commodity instead of a human being. And you have the audacity to sit there and lecture me about responsibility? The mention of Diana seemed to energize Piers rather than shame him. Your mother was a complicated woman who made her own choices about how to handle the media. But she never abandoned her duties, Harry. Even at her lowest points, she understood that being royal meant service, not self-serving. She's probably spinning in her grave, watching what you've become. The studio gasped audibly at the brutal reference to Princess Diana. Harry's face went through a series of expressions: shock, pain, and then pure, unadulterated fury. His hands were trembling now, and when he spoke, his voice was barely controlled. How dare you speak about my mother that way? How fucking dare you use her memory to make your pathetic points? I'm using her example, Piers replied coldly, to show you what integrity actually looks like. Your mother faced the same institution, the same pressures, the same media scrutiny. But she didn't run away to California and start a podcast about it. She didn't sell out her family for Netflix money. She found ways to serve that were bigger than her own pain. Harry was pacing now, running his hands through his hair, looking like a man on the edge of a complete breakdown. She didn't have social media. She didn't have the 24-hour news cycle. She didn't have excuses. Piers cut him off brutally. That's what she didn't have. And that's what you've never run out of. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Camera operators were adjusting their positions, sensing that something unprecedented was about to happen. Harry stopped pacing and fixed Piers with a stare that was pure hatred. You're a fucking vulture, Piers. A bottom feeder who's made his fortune off other people's misery. And you're a spoiled prince who's never had to face real consequences for anything in his life, Piers replied without missing a beat. Until now, because right now, in this moment, everyone watching can see exactly who you really are. Not the wounded victim, not the mental health advocate, not the social justice warrior. Just a bitter, entitled man-child who can't handle being called out for his bullshit. Harry stood frozen for a moment, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing with a fury that seemed to consume him entirely. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and deadly. This interview is over. But Piers wasn't done. What he said next would trigger the most explosive exit in television history. You know what, Harry? Piers called out, as Harry started to move toward the edge of the set. Don't walk away. That's what you always do, isn't it? When things get tough, when people start asking the hard questions, you just walk away. Just like you walked away from your military brothers. Just like you walked away from your charitable commitments. Just like you walked away from your dying grandfather. Harry froze mid-step, his entire body going rigid. Slowly, almost mechanically, he turned back to face Piers. What did you just say? Piers sensed blood in the water and pressed his advantage. Prince Philip, your grandfather, while he was in the hospital, fighting for his life. Where were you? Oh, that's right. You were in California, recording interviews about how terrible your family was. The man who served his country for decades, who gave up everything for duty, and his own grandson couldn't be bothered to be there when he needed him most. Stop, Harry whispered. But his voice carried no authority now, only pain. He died knowing that his grandson had chosen Hollywood over honor. He died watching you trash everything he'd spent his life building. Tell me, Harry, how does that feel? How does it feel to know that one of the last things Prince Philip saw was his grandson selling out the family for American television ratings? Harry's face had gone completely pale, except for 2 bright spots of color on his cheeks. His hands were shaking visibly now. You don't know what you're talking about. My grandfather understood. Your grandfather understood service, sacrifice, duty, concepts that are completely foreign to you now, Piers interrupted ruthlessly. He understood that being royal means putting the monarchy before yourself. He understood that some things are more important than your feelings, your trauma, your need for validation. He understood what you've forgotten, that real men don't abandon their posts when things get difficult. The words hit Harry like physical blows. He was swaying slightly on his feet, looking like a man who'd just been punched in the gut. Stop it! Just fucking stop it! The truth hurts, doesn't it? Piers continued relentlessly. Your grandfather spent 99 years proving that service matters more than self-interest. And you've spent the last few years proving that you're not worthy of his legacy. You're not worthy of your title, your bloodline, or the respect that name once commanded. Harry's breathing was becoming erratic, and for a moment, it looked like he might actually collapse. But instead of weakness, something else took over. A cold, dangerous fury that seemed to straighten his spine and sharpen his focus. "You piece of shit," he said quietly, but every word carried the force of a slap. "You absolute fucking piece of shit." "There we go." Piers smiled triumphantly. "Show them who you really are, Harry. Show them the spoiled brat behind the therapy speak. You want to see who I really am?" Harry's voice was rising now, building to something that sounded almost feral. "I'm someone who had the courage to break a cycle of abuse. I'm someone who chose love over duty, truth over tradition, authenticity over the fucking lie that you and people like you have been peddling for generations." "You're someone who quit," Piers roared back. "You're someone who took his ball and went home when he didn't get his way. You're someone who—" "I'm someone who survived," Harry exploded, his voice echoing through the studio with such force that several crew members stepped backward. "I survived an institution that killed my mother. I survived being second best my entire fucking life. I survived watching my family prioritize their precious reputation over my mental health, over my wife's safety, over basic human decency." The raw emotion in Harry's voice was so intense that it seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. For a moment, even Piers looked taken aback by the sheer force of Harry's pain and fury. But he recovered quickly, sensing that this was the moment for the kill shot. "And yet here you are," Piers said with cold precision, "still obsessed with them, still defining yourself in opposition to them, still unable to move on. For all your talk about breaking cycles and finding freedom, you're more trapped by that institution than you ever were when you were actually serving it. At least then you had purpose. Now you're just a professional victim with a podcast." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Harry stood there for what felt like an eternity, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with something that looked like shocked recognition. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a finality that everyone in the studio could feel. "You know what, Piers? You're absolutely right about one thing. I am trapped. I'm trapped in a conversation with a sad, bitter old man who gets his kicks from tearing people down because his own life is so fucking empty that he needs other people's pain to feel alive." Harry started moving toward the exit, but his words kept coming, each sentence delivered with devastating clarity. "You sit there in your little studio, passing judgment on people who are actually living their lives, making mistakes, trying to grow while you've turned cowardice into a career. You hide behind your microphone and your questions because you're too much of a coward to actually examine your own failures, your own damage, your own pathetic need to be relevant." Piers opened his mouth to respond, but Harry wasn't finished. He turned back one final time, his eyes blazing with contempt. "My mother, my grandfather, my family, they all understood something that you never will. They understood that real power comes from lifting people up, not tearing them down. They understood that strength comes from service, not from savagery. And they understood that at the end of the day, what matters isn't what some washed-up journalist thinks about your choices. It's whether you can look at yourself in the mirror and know that you chose love over fear." Harry ripped off his microphone with such force that the wire snapped, the small electronic device clattering across the studio floor. "This interview is over, and so is any pretense that you're anything more than a fucking parasite who feeds off other people's misery." Piers finally found his voice as Harry reached the exit. "Running away again, Harry, just like always." Harry paused at the door, his hand on the handle. For a moment, it looked like he might turn around for one final exchange. Instead, he did something that no one expected. He laughed. It was a short, bitter sound, but it carried more dismissal than any words could have. "I'm not running, Piers," Harry said without turning around. "I'm choosing not to waste another second of my life on someone who mistakes cruelty for journalism and thinks that other people's pain is his entertainment." With that, Prince Harry walked out of the studio, leaving behind the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hallway in a studio full of people who had just witnessed one of the most brutal confrontations in television history. Piers sat behind his desk, his trademark smirk looking forced now, addressing the cameras with words that felt hollow after what had just unfolded. The confrontation was over, but the aftermath would be talked about for years. Harry had entered the studio as a man trying to control his narrative, and left as someone who had finally stopped caring what anyone else thought about his story. And Piers, for all his verbal victory, looked like a man who had won a battle but lost something essential in the process. The interview that was supposed to expose Harry had ended up revealing something far more uncomfortable: the difference between someone fighting for their truth and someone who had made a career out of destroying others to build themselves up.